Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're breaking down the trending hashtag cancel Netflix. So, if you've been on social media lately, you've probably seen hashtag cancel Netflix trending. And you might be scratching your head, and honestly, for good reason. It turns out people are trying to cancel the streaming giant for, get this, completely opposite reasons. All right, let's break this down. On one side, you've got big names like Elon Musk calling Netflix a woke mind virus. But then on the complete other side, you have activist groups saying it's silencing pro-Palestinian voices. I mean, it's a perfect storm of our modern culture wars, all focused on one company. Okay, so to make sense of all this, here's what we're going to cover. We'll look at the culture wars, the politics, and even just the price of it all. Then we'll get into the psychology of how these boycotts even work in the first place. All right, let's jump into our first section, the war for your screen. This is all about the culture clash, and trust me, this is where it gets really, really heated. So a huge part of this comes from conservative critics, and you see it amplified by people like Elon Musk. The main argument? That Netflix is pushing a progressive agenda, especially when it comes to things like gender identity in shows meant for kids and families. And a perfect example of this is the whole controversy around Dead End Paranormal Park. Now, this was an animated show that had a teenage transgender character. It actually got canceled back in 2023, but then clips started resurfacing online. The whole thing just exploded when the show's creator got into it online with some controversial posts. That led to a ton of influencers calling for a boycott, accusing Netflix of pushing what they called a pro-trans agenda on kids. And, this isn't the first time Netflix has been in this exact spot. Remember the whole Dave Chappelle controversy back in 2021? His special, The Closer, had jokes that were heavily criticized as transphobic. You had groups like GLAAD condemning it, while Netflix execs defended it, saying content doesn't directly cause real-world harm. It got so intense that trans employees and their allies actually staged a walkout. It was a huge flashpoint between artistic freedom and the impact on a vulnerable community. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. At the exact same time Netflix is getting slammed for being too woke, it's also facing boycotts from the other side of the political spectrum for basically not being progressive enough. Yeah, so the activist group Code Pink is heading up a campaign that accuses Netflix of having an anti-Palestinian bias. They're pointing to a couple of key things. First, the film Mary, where an Israeli actress was cast to play Mary, who historically was born in Bethlehem, Palestine. And second, they're protesting what they call the quiet removal of at least 19 licensed Palestinian films from the platform. They're demanding Netflix bring those films back and start platforming more Palestinian voices. And for these activists, the timing is everything. Jody Evans, the co-founder of Code Pink, put it this way: a genocide is not the time to be silent about Palestine. We must raise up Palestinian stories. The argument is that removing these films during a major conflict just adds to a one-sided narrative and dehumanizes people by erasing their stories from a global platform. Now, what does Netflix have to say about this? Well, their official stance is that this wasn't a political decision at all. They say the films were removed simply because the licenses expired. It's a standard practice, just like when a super popular show like, say, Friends leaves the service because the deal is up. It's business, not politics, according to them. So, okay, we've got these intense political battles raging, but you know what? There's another, maybe even more universal reason people are hitting that cancel subscription button, and it has everything to do with what's in their wallets. Yep, it really just comes down to money. There's this phenomenon people are calling streamflation. So many users are just plain fed up. The prices keep going up, they crack down on password sharing, and a lot of people feel like the quality of the shows and movies is actually going down. It's a frustrating combo. And you see this frustration bubbling up everywhere online, especially on places like Reddit. Here's one user who kind of sums it up perfectly. Netflix has been hiking up prices at rates that are unprecedented. They are doing this because we enable them. This feeling of being squeezed for less value, it really adds fuel to the fire when these other political boycotts pop up. So let's recap. You've got pressure from the right, pressure from the left, and pressure from people just trying to save a buck. But the pushback isn't just coming from outside the company. It's also coming from within. Remember that employee walkout over the Dave Chappelle special? Well, a lot of commentators saw that as more than just a one-off protest. They viewed it as part of this bigger movement happening across the tech industry, where employees are demanding more of a say in their company's ethics and how they operate. Okay, so we have all these different groups trying to boycott Netflix for all these different reasons. But how does a boycott actually work? And maybe the bigger question is, do they even last?
Well, lucky for us, some researchers have looked into this. There's a great study from the Journal of Business Ethics that gives us a framework for understanding the whole life cycle of a consumer boycott.
And it really boils down to two key motivations, or drivers. First, you have expressive drivers. This is all about emotion. It's about venting your frustration and anger at something you feel is just plain wrong. Then you have instrumental drivers. This is the more practical side. It's the belief that by boycotting, you can actually force the company to change. And these two drivers create a pretty predictable two-phase life cycle for a boycott. It kicks off with the heat-up phase. This is where all that expressive anger takes over. Outrage is high, emotions are running hot, and a lot of people jump on board. But then it usually enters a cool-down phase. The initial fire starts to fade, the more practical, instrumental side kicks in. People start asking, is this actually working? Is it worth the hassle? And that's usually when you see participation start to drop off. So when you put it all together, this leaves Netflix, and honestly any massive global company like it, in a really tough spot. Maybe an impossible one. They're trying to serve literally thousands of different taste clusters all around the world. In an age this polarized, is it even possible to be neutral? If you try to please everyone, do you just end up pleasing no one? I mean, that really is the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it?